Tonight's class is on the planets, and I have another great quote by D.H. Lawrence, who lived a long time here in New Mexico. The cosmos is a vast living body of which we are all still parts. The sun is a great heart whose tremors run through our smallest veins. The moon is a great nerve center from which we quiver forever. Who knows the power that Saturn has over us, or Venus? But it is a vital power, rippling exquisitely through us all the time. So, tonight's class is on the planet. In ancient times, astronomers noted how what appeared to be certain stars moved across the sky in relation to other stars. Ancient Greeks called these wandering stars, or planetes asteres, or simply planetoi, wanderers, from which today's word planet was derived. In astrology, we work with 10 planets, and they represent in a chart what we call urges. Does everyone have an idea of what an urge is?
Yeah. I
have one.
But these are like
I'm sure you have more than one.
But these are more than just the urge to quench your thirst.
Or go to the bathroom.
Right. These are like primal, or no, not primal. What would they be?
Essential?
No, they're archetypal.
I think they're all of those. I think some of them are primal, because in these urges are the primal urges for significance, reproduction, and nutrition. They are essential in that there are certain things that we as humans cannot live without. For example, when we talk of religious urges, this is something that is common to tribes people around the world. So I think they are essential. So they're primal, they're essential. Urges are the things that motivate us into some kind of action.
Like, do you think everybody has the urge to find beauty in their life?
No, I don't believe that everyone does. Or maybe I'll take that back. I think everyone does to some degree, and it's stratified from those whom it dominates. And then there are those where it's on a lesser degree, and as I always like to say, beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
That's true.
Or as the ancient Romans would say, in gustibus non disputandis, which is basically, in matters of taste, there's no argument. We all think we have superior taste. So it's truly, in matters of beauty, much of it is just what we personally are attracted to. So these are urges, these are motivations in the unconscious mind that push us into thinking, feeling, and behaving actions of some kind. So we're going to go through each of the urges first, and then we're going to study them in detail tonight. The first of the urges is the power urges, which is ruled by the sun. And we'll talk about them more. There are domestic urges ruled by the moon, intellectual urges ruled by Mercury, social urges ruled by Venus. There are aggressive urges governed by Mars. Oh, they're coming up fast. Religious urges, which Jupiter rules. There are safety urges of Saturn, individualistic urges of Uranus, Utopian urges, Neptune, and universal welfare urges of Pluto. Now, here you are just receiving one list of keywords, and what you'll see repeatedly in this class, on the beginning level, what we are doing is we're developing vocabulary. And you may have heard this from me last week, which is this level of class, you actually have to develop a certain degree of memorization to move forward in a domain such as astrology, every domain one goes into has its own set of language. So if your background is in studying fine arts or music, you have a vocabulary specific to that domain. If you are an electrical engineer, you're going to have language specific to that domain. Or if you work in construction or agriculture. So this is the language of our domain, the domain of astrology. But the language of astrology is also the alphabet of all occultism. So if you learn this language, the vocabulary carries over into other areas of understanding.
What about those, I know those to be key words. Do you think those are those words unique in their power to elicit imagery, or?
Yes, and the way I look at the way I look at keywords, Vicki, is they're like the button you push, which then starts the whole tape rolling of what all the other meanings and keywords are. So when we work with a singular keyword like this, which describes the urge, you know, and I might fuss around a bit with Venus, but social urges is fairly complete with that, though it's hard to describe the instinct of Venus for both socializing but also beauty, which is so essential to Venus and is not described in social. But that's probably the only one of those keywords that I've wrestled with but have not found a better replacement for.
Yeah, okay.
And then there's sometimes where I've thought about Pluto too, but I don't think I have a better thought series to describe Pluto. So, for me, those first keywords are the buttons we get to push to start spilling out the rest of the vocabulary. I like to look at the way we learn astrology and the way we learn tarot is building an upside-down pyramid. Because the foundation is we start with one word, and then we expand our vocabulary to indicate positive and negative traits, so that we're starting to then think in a binary system. And then we build a next level above that, which becomes more descriptive words. And do I even have the sound on?
You're coming in pretty
Okay,
good.
great. Just thought I'd check. Senior moment. I love it now that I'm 55. I get a discount at the hot spring. So I saw a menu yesterday that said 55 and older. So, but I also have to go back and check things twice. Did I leave it on or not? All right. What was I talking about? Something to do with astrology?
Keyword. We were talking about
yeah.
keywords, yeah.
All right. Upside down pyramid. That's the way we build. The larger vocabulary you can develop, the better an astrologer you will be. And I think in the first class when I broke it down into planet signs, houses, and aspects, I tried to look at it almost like diagramming a sentence. The signs which we studied last week are your adjectives and adverbs. They are the descriptors. What's interesting is planets can be both nouns because they do describe the who, what, where of things. But planets can also be verbs because they do show a type of motivating force. They are an urge, so they also lead to action. Aspects are also verbs in a chart because they show how energies are operating. And, well, what are we missing? Houses. Houses oftentimes in that combination of looking at a story tell us about where.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we're looking at, you know, the who, what, when, where, how. The houses in many ways relate to the where.
They describe the environment
They do.
pretty much, don't they?
Yeah, they are the where.
Yeah.
Though signs to some degree become the descriptors also of the environment. But I like to look at them as the adverbs. They may describe to you how, the way in which the action is performed, but they're also adjectives, and they're also descriptors of places as well, and or of persons. So, that may not be a completely baked thought, but I'm still
No,
working
but
on it.
you're on a good track.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, may have pulled that cake out of the oven too early. All right. So, that takes us to one of the first steps we do. And this is something you can do if you don't know the time of someone's birth. You can still get good descriptors of a personality. And class, I'm very proud to say that there's someone present in the class who actually wants to learn to set up charts.
Yeah.
And one of the things you do when you're going to set up charts is you have to work with an ephemeris, which is basically a table that gives you for any day of any year, either for 0 hour or noon, where the planetary positions were in Greenwich. And it's from that we calculate a chart. So one of the things we're looking at when we look at planets is planets in signs. So by just looking at an ephemeris, you can pull out the degree of a person's planet and the sign in which they fall, with the exception of the moon. The reason for that is the moon moves 13 degrees a day. So if somebody's born at 1 minute after midnight, you know, the first minute of the day, or at 11:59 p.m., there's going to be a 13-degree difference between those lunar positions. So, we spoke about this last week when we discussed the signs, which is each of the planets represents a tone on the scale. And that tone represents sound moving at a particular frequency, or what we call vibration. Each one has its own specific vibration. However, the audio experience, the aural experience, is different to us depending on the type of instrument it's played on, whether it's played on a string instrument or a woodwind, etc. So each of the planets which we're going to learn tonight expresses differently depending upon which sign they fall in. And I do believe I included last week a table of essential dignities. If not, I better bring it next week, because...
So by that you mean like Mars, if it's in Virgo, would be different
Then if it's in
than
Aries.
if it's in Aries.
Mm-hmm. And very different if it's in Libra, which is opposite its home sign. And very different if it's in Taurus, again, opposite its home sign of Scorpio. So we use different adjectives describing how that planet expresses when it's in a different sign. So this is how the signs become the adjectives and the adverbs. The other thing that happens with signs, and this is why it's so important to learn essential dignities, is it's like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. she went around, she was, one bed's too hard, one bed's too soft, one bed's just right. It's the same with each of the planets in the signs. They experience the signs differently. There are certain signs that they are more comfortable in, and they can just make themselves at home and fall asleep. And then there are other signs that the porridge is too hot or too cold. And so by knowing the essential dignities, that's one of the first steps to having a degree of understanding about the harmony or discord of a planet. Its ability to express its finer qualities or its more negative qualities. I guess the table of essential dignities was to come with this class. Those of you who are online, there are actually 2 handouts for tonight's class, and you can download this and have a copy. Those of you who are in class, well, I won't say you're out of luck. You'll just have to wait till next week. But that's what a table of essential dignities looks like. And I'm not going to now go through each and every planet. But I'm going to give you the most obvious example, which is working with the sun. The sun, we know, is at home in Leo. It's at home, why? That sign is most comfortable to him. The sun likes to express with rulership and authority and significance. And Leo is the absolute best sign in which to do that. The opposite sign of Leo is Aquarius. So, for a planet that loves authority, what happens when it goes into Aquarius? It becomes anti-authoritarian. So, or in a sense, when the sun is in Aquarius, Aquarian persons are generally authority oppositional. Think of any Aquarians you know.
Right. Well, and does the quality of knowing it all, which a lot of Aquarians tend to do, does that come from wanting to express authority through?
Well, it has to do with authority, which is the sun, but through the element of ideas, which is air. And because it's a fixed sign, then it's more rigid in its expression. So, you mean they don't know everything?
Well, sometimes they don't know something.
Okay.
Just minor things there.
Well, now we have the exaltation of the sun in Aries. Why? Aries, like Leo, is a fire sign. And when the sun is in Aries, it has free and full expression. There's no holding it back. What's the key word for Aries? It's like, I am. So, and the planets actually have degrees of exaltation. This is from what I call old-timey astrology, classical astrology, 19 degrees. Now, opposite Aries is Libra, so this is the fall of the sun. The sun or ego has no trouble expressing in Aries. There's no holding it back. However, in Libra, what happens? Oh, do you like my shirt? Is it really okay? Do I look fine?
It triangulates.
Yeah. In Libra, what happens is it's looking for approval because the inner sense of security that Aries has, that confidence, is lacking in that sign. It looks for approval, not self-approval, but approval through others. So we can see how the sun is now expressing in its fall. It's not that comfortable in that sign. The harmony is in Sagittarius. So here, the sun, which is the power urges, in Sagittarius, it's a fire sign, so it has good expression. It's a mutable sign. But opposite that is the sign of Gemini. What happens with the sun in Gemini?
Gets split.
Yeah, it does. That changeableness comes in, and it really becomes conflicted. So, and in harmony is mild. I mean, it's just a mild expression, and one can see that the sun, just from this, the sun is doing well in fire signs, but it's having inadequate expression in air signs. So that's an example of how essential dignities works. And as you move along in studying charts, you will have this page, this fabulous page next week. You'll be able to apply this in your chart studies. So that is one concept. There are planets in signs. There are also planets in houses. And we are actually going to learn houses next week. So what I'm instructing you in here is actually sort of a step ahead. But nevertheless, the houses of a chart, which we'll learn next week, are sort of a secondary zodiac. It's a wheel of 12 spokes that moves daily against the outer wheel of the zodiac, and it changes approximately every 2 hours. Now, as the houses actually look like a piece of pie when you're looking at a chart, unless you're looking at a Jyotish chart or a very old horoscope. And then they look like one of those little games that we used to play where we'd fold paper and open it up.
They're square instead of...
Yeah, and then when you unfold one of those, and it's got little things written on it. So they're a different shape. The houses are triangular in a Jyotish chart. But nevertheless, the pie-shaped houses which we use is this sort of wheel, like a wagon wheel or a bicycle wheel, moving against a secondary or outer wheel, which is the zodiac. So, when a planet falls in a house, it actually influences our thinking about that area of life. It brings specific trends of thinking and feeling, and that thinking and feeling, whether it's aggressive, religious, safety, individualistic, or utopian, attracts events into that specific area of life of a like nature. Like attracts like. And whether that planet is harmonious or discordant, that determines the type of experience, the conditioning of the experiences that we attract in. When we're looking at planets in a house, and you'll hear this again from me in about 3 weeks, is the planet which is closest to the cusp of the house, and that is always the spoke before the house. That planet is considered to be the chief ruler of that house. And any other planets in that house are co-rulers. Now, the other thing is, sometimes houses are unoccupied. There are no tenants in that house. So what we do is we then have to look at the sign on the cusp of the house. This is one reason why in your homework for last week, I've asked that you take your computer-generated chart and that you transfer the signs and the degrees and minutes of the house cusp to the outside of a blank chart form. Already, you're going to come into a greater cognizance of your own chart by doing that. And then going back to last week's class where we discussed the rulers, you can basically determine what the chief ruler is for unoccupied houses. And on those houses which are occupied, the planet that governs the sign on the cusp also becomes a co-ruler. This is essential in determining the type of experiences we draw through that particular house, and it becomes even more elucidating when we start to do progressions. It's very important to have that information about your own chart memorized. So, Now we're going to just kick into the material itself. There is an order to all of this. We begin with the sun, and in the soul, the sun governs what are called the power urges. I always think it's important to look at the symbol, which here is a circle in which there is a dot or a period. The circle represents that which has no beginning and no end, which is spirit or deity. The dot represents the germ of the divine that is in each of us. So, in Hermeticism, the sun represents the ego, that sense of I. And it represents the spark of the divine in each person. And we use ego slightly different than it's used in psychology. So, in any chart, the sun is going to be the planet that governs our vitality, our life force, our energy. It has to do with our sense of significance, which can express positively as self-esteem, negatively as low or poor self-esteem. The sun represents, in general, relationships that an individual has with men, the male sex in general, and it represents our ability to express authority or leadership and our relationships with those persons who are in power. Also, the sun represents our ability to attract recognition, to have significance. And recognition oftentimes takes place in the form of, honors, awards, praise, and social recognition. So, we're going to work with another key word. We've talked about the urges of the planet, which in this case are power. What's synonymous with power? Any thoughts on that?
Vitality.
Vitality is one form of power, sheer physical force. Control. In fact, sun personalities tend to be controlling. On a positive level, control is having skill or ability. On the most negative level, it can be micromanaging, trying to control everyone and everything around you. Now, this key word, which comes up here, which is vigor, what does that ring in anyone in the class?
Energy, adequate, lots of energy.
Great. Adequate or abundant energy. Think of it more as abundant than adequate. What would adequate energy be? I don't even know if there's a word for that.
Yeah.
But vigor would be, there is?
Yes,
There's a
satisfaction.
dictionary.
Satisfaction.
Okay, satisfaction. All right. That and status quo might be average energy.
Yeah.
But vigor sort of implies that there's just a little bit more than the normal person.
You're energized.
Yeah, you're getting up, it's get up and go is what that is. So, what we say is whatever house in a chart, and we're going to study the houses next week, but whatever house the sun falls in, it brings to that department of life vigor. This is an area of your existence where you feel vigorous.
I thought of another word for power.
Okay.
Influence.
Influence. Power, yes.
That feels right to me. I don't know.
How to make friends and influence people. So,
Yeah.
yeah, power is influence, and social power is influence. Oh, pushing the wrong button. All right, here we have a couple of things coming up. The positive traits of the sun are described as rulership. Now, a ruler is a leader. It's somebody who listens to the ideas of others and then guides them. Well, opposite that, the negative traits are dictativeness. There's a lot of fuss in the world right now, especially in North Africa, Tunisia, and Egypt, and I think even now it's spreading to Yemen. But there's a lot of fuss in the world over authoritative leaders, which function as dictators. The thing about power that is so very intoxicating, it's sort of the highest drug for most, is that once one has power, they rarely ever want to relinquish it. So we actually live in a somewhat rare society in that, every 4 years we have sort of a micro-revolution.
Sorry. That is what it feels like.
Yeah. It's a micro-revolution.
Right.
And one has to step down from power.
It's like a controlled burning of the fields.
Control.
A
being
controlled
the operative
burn,
word.
yes.
Though sometimes it burns. But the older I get, the more they all seem alike to me. Okay, now, here is the word neutral, and this is going to come up. Neutral implies conditioning. There are 3 types of conditioning, which is harmony, discord, and neutrality. Neutrality means it doesn't add conditioning. There's not a conditioning adds feelings to things. So the sun is what we call a neutral planet. Now, in 2 weeks, we'll be discussing harmony, discord, and neutrality again when we talk about aspects. So these are 2 of the big factors that give conditioning in the chart. A very mild factor is the Goldilocks factor that we talked about before, essential dignities. What sign a planet falls in adds some conditioning. The planet itself might have inherent conditioning, and then the type of aspect formed between planets adds conditioning. So let's talk about the sun in mythology. To the Egyptians, the sun was Aten, who sailed across the sky in a solar barge. It was his presence that created day and his absence night. To the Greeks and Romans, he was either Helios or Apollo. And he rode in a chariot and governed medicine, healing, and theater. And this is an image, wonderful gold image of Helios.
With 9 rays, it looks like.
Indeed. Every culture has a different mythology associated with the sun. But you can see in these that not only the concept of light and dark is associated here, but the force that gives vitality to all things. The sun rules the sign of Leo, and we know that already because we just looked at a table of essential dignities. So, The sun can have different ways of expressing. There are harmonious and there are discordant expressions of the sun. This, we've decided, the sun is neutral, so whether the sun in your chart expresses harmoniously or discordantly is going to depend upon the sign in which it falls, as well as the aspects received from other planets, which, that's 2 weeks out. You'll have to wait. So, if we think about a harmonious sun, this is going to be a person who goes through life experiencing leadership opportunities. They have abundant vitality. They treat other people with respect. They tend to attract into their lives things such as honors, awards, even if it's just a pat on the back or a hearty handshake. And they are individuals who tend to have positive experiences with authority figures. So those are positive expressions of the sun. The opposite of that, if the sun is discordant in a chart, then this is an individual who may have issues of pride, but in this case, pridefulness is false pride. There's a difference between taking pride in doing the best that you do and having a genuine assessment of who you are and what your accomplishments are, then pridefulness when one expects or even feels entitled to a certain level of experience and honor from those around them. This is sort of expecting honors without effort. They can be dictative, egotistic, and the person in whose chart the sun is discordant tends to attract in losses of esteem and honor, and they have problems with authority figures. Question?
Well, a comment. You know, the rulership keyword, I thought about that a lot. You mentioned something about it being guidance, associated with guidance. Did you say that? Oh, okay.
But
Okay.
I'm listening.
Okay. Well, I always think of rulership as being the
I understand.
willingness.
Yeah.
Okay.
Positive
Right.
expression.
And I always think of rulership as being sort of a willingness to take authority in a situation, which is not necessarily guidance. Maybe it should be.
Well, it is. If a good ruler guides others through their ideas. I mean, if you think of it in a workplace, chances are some of us have had opportunities to be in workplaces where there are new managers that come in.
Uh-huh.
And there are those managers that come in and they just have a list of things that they're going to do to change. Good managers or rulers will come in. They might spend a month or two going from department to department, studying who's in that department, observing them at work, seeing how they interact with other workers, looking at their productivity, and then sort of assessing the whole situation and coming in, and they will talk to those employees and say, okay, let me know what works, what doesn't work for you.
Uh-huh.
They then go back with all of that information and then set about to make their changes. So that, I think, that expresses rulership, whereas the other is just dictativeness. It's just coming in and being the authority, but not necessarily having a grasp.
Right. I think what I'm trying to grasp here is that not everybody's willing to take authority.
No.
And that's and how you express it may be different. But authority and rulership seem to go more together than, well, I'll think about that some more.
So, each and every planet can have positive and negative expressions, and that's something we have to be able to basically quickly recall words that describe either side of each coin, because that will come up in charts. The moon is the domestic urges of the soul, and in a chart, the moon has to do, well, if we think of domestic urges, they have to do with those urges which relate to home, family, and there's one of the most wonderful words in the books that Zane uses, which is philoprogenitiveness. I did not put that in your notes, but the love of one's progeny, the love of children, is governed by the moon. Philoprogenitiveness, if you're ever tested, or if you're playing balderdash or something, you might need that word. But the moon also has to do with our emotional states, our moods. And if you think about it, the moon of all of the orbs in the heaven changes from one night to the next. Not only is she in a different part of the sky, but she's slightly fuller or slightly diminishing in size. So what changes more frequently than our moods? In general, the moon will represent our relationship with mother figures, the female sex, and with women. Now, we say whatever house in a chart that the moon falls in is subject to fluctuation. This is constant or continuous small changes. Positively, the moon expresses as adaptability, and negatively as moodiness. So, I think it was Darwin who told us that adaptation is the key to survival. You know, every life form has to adapt to a constantly changing environment. So, whether the moon is dominant in your chart or not, the more you develop that trait, the more likely you are to bounce back from the arrows of misfortune in life. The moon also is neutral, which means that it has no inherent harmony or discord, that it's completely conditioned either by the sign in which it falls or the aspects that it receives from other planets. Now, if we look at the moon in mythology, I really love this image, and I can relate to it. This is one of the lunar goddesses from the Near East, who I think it was Selene, who had 100 breasts. Yeah, if you have a dominant moon, you're going to feel that those aren't feathers. No. You're going to feel like every life form around you is sucking on you in some way. Yeah, they all expect to be nurtured by you. So, the moon is considered feminine, and so in most cultures, she's pictured by lunar goddesses. Artemis Diana, the daughter of Zeus and Leto, was twin to the sun god Apollo, and worshipped throughout the Hellenic world. Artemis eventually replaced Selene as the moon goddess, the chief moon goddess. And the moon governs the sign of Cancer. This is what we say is the home sign, because they're similar. They are most similar in their qualities of sensitivity, moodiness, nurturing, caring, philoprogenitiveness. Now, if you have a harmonious moon in your chart, you are somebody who is going to have positive experiences within your home and with your family. You'll have plenty of opportunities to be caring, compassionate, and nurturing. Well, actually, you'll have those opportunities even if you have a discordant moon.
You may enjoy them more.
You'll enjoy them more if your moon is harmonious. You tend to experience heightened intuition, and you have positive interactions with women. If the moon is discordant, for some reason I came up with more items here. But the tendency for a discordant moon is that one tends towards being passive and submissive. Impressionable, moody, temperamental, you have fluctuating emotions, you can be fickle, and you can be the victim of gossip, or you can be the source of gossip. Third planet. Now, Mercury is actually the first real planet we're working with. I have to go back and say that the Sun is actually a minor star. The Moon, which is at the center of our solar system, the Moon is a satellite which revolves around the Earth. So, they're not really planets, but they are key factors in astrology. We call them planets because they move and they govern urges. Mercury affects studies, mental interest. A person with a strong Mercury is always engaged in writing and intellectual activity. Mercury is responsible for accuracy in calculations, memory, and attracts opportunities for communication and self-expression. Now, the house in which Mercury falls in a chart, we say that that department of life is subject to thought. Mercury has a positive trait of expression. In fact, I always say the worst thing you can say to a dominant Mercury person is shut up. If you do that, you're squelching their sense of self, because the Mercury person identifies with their ideas. The negative trait of Mercury is nervousness. They tend to be anxious, restless. Oftentimes they're the kid in the classroom who's, jiggling, tapping, shaking, I always say their engine's running. However, Mercury is a neutral planet, like the Sun and the Moon. Mercury has no inherent conditioning, so its harmony or discord is dependent upon the sign in which it falls, the aspects it receives, and the planets it receives aspects from. In mythology, Mercury is Hermes, who was the son of Zeus and Maya. He was the god of weights and measures, so here you can see the sense of calculation is in place. And Mercury does exactly that. Mercury calculates, perceives, evaluates, analyzes. He was also the god of commerce and cunning, boundaries, which is basically, this is the fence between you and your neighbor, or whatever marks off your property, travel and travelers, wit, literature, oratory, and poetry. So, if you think of him as being the god of commerce, our words merchant, merchandise, mercenary, all have their origins in Mercury, the Roman god of trade. Mercury, and we discussed this last week when we did the signs, Mercury rules both Gemini and Virgo. If Mercury is harmonious in your chart, why, you will have the opportunity to express higher intelligence. You'll be perceptive, reflective, analytical, evaluating. You are somebody who will exercise logic and reasoning. I'm making Barb yawn. Must have been the word exercise. All right. If Mercury's discordant in your chart, then what happens? You become critical. You have poor communication skills. There are errors in calculation. One has nervousness, anxiety, neuroses, mental ruminations, and forgetfulness. You can even have that without a discordant Mercury.
I was going to ask.
I think age is a factor. All right, let's move on to Venus, because she's a whole lot more fun. Venus governs the social urges. So it's her tendency to attract friendship, socializing, and really good friends, affection or romantic opportunities, gratuities, gifts, pleasure, and experiences with beauty and the arts are all governed by Venus. Gratuities is one of her keywords. We say when Venus falls in any house in the chart, that house is subject to gratuities. We don't use this word much anymore. We may talk about gratuitous sex, but usually we see gratuities when we're paying the bill at the restaurant. It may say gratuity included, or it might even give you a little guide at the bottom of the slip, depending on how fancy the restaurant is you go to, as to whether the gratuity would be, 15%, 18%, 20%. So what are gratuities?
Little gifts.
They're tips, they're little gifts. They're not big gifts, but they're little gifts. So wherever Venus falls in your chart, that area of your life is going to be subject to little gifts. Her positive trait is affection. We like to be around Venus people because they tend to be warm, friendly, they make us feel desired. And her negative trait is pliancy. Nancy Reagan must not have had a dominant Venus because her key phrase was, just say no. Venus doesn't know how to do that. Because of this, there's a whole area of disease named in her honor, which is venereal. She is known as the lesser benefic, which you can see the Latin origin here, bene, which means good. She brings small good things to us. So, what does that mean?
I like her.
Yeah, and she ain't neutral. Venus has 1/4 harmony that she brings with her, that is inherent to her nature. Now, in mythology, here's a very famous image from Botticelli. Venus was Aphrodite, and she was born, the story's not that pretty when you think about it. Venus was born from the ocean's foam after Kronos castrated Uranus and threw his genitals into the sea. Many images, therefore, have her rising out of on a shell, this being one of the most famous. Certain things, such as apples, limes, myrtle, pomegranates, and roses, were considered sacred to the goddess. Among animals, dolphins, doves, sparrows, and swans. in the zodiac, she rules both Taurus and Libra. If Venus is harmonious in your chart, you are somebody who has heightened creativity. You may attract in affection and or romantic opportunities, gifts and gratuities, increased cultural interest, and things come with greater ease. However, if Venus is discordant, you may have a life where you experience a loss of love, disappointments with friends, creative blocks, laziness, or over-sensuality. The last two combined are really quite a gift. All right. Mars, the aggressive urges in the soul. Mars expresses through courage, passion, strife, antagonism, and effort. Did I say strife? Mm-hmm. Wherever Mars falls in your chart, we say that that house is subject to strife. His positive traits are initiative. So if you think about it, without Mars, we would have no motivation. We wouldn't have the passion to do things that are important to us. So Mars is essential for a certain amount of drive. But his negative traits are harshness. You know, Mars can't help but want to pull the wings off butterflies, you know, and kick the cat. There's just, you know, the devil made me do it. It's that sort of thing. And Mars is what we call a minor malefic. So Mars has conditioning, and he brings 1/4 discord to everything he does. You know, he wants to be constructive and build, but then he hits his thumb with a hammer. That's just kind of what happens when you're dealing with Mars. Now, in mythology, Mars was known to the Greeks as Ares, from which we also get the name of the sign which he rules. And to the Greeks, Mars was really a very dark side of this planet. It was unpredictable violence or war, bloodlust, savage warfare. His chariot was pulled by 4 fire-breathing stallions. And in the city-state of Sparta, he was propitiated before the citizens would go into battle. Now, so the Greeks...
you know, propitiated. I don't know what that means.
That's when you give ritual and honor.
Oh, okay.
You know, I'm going to go take my novena to Mars and light my candles, and maybe I'll take them some cake or cut off a chicken head or something.
Okay.
Well, that's more appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
Now, the Romans had a different take on Mars. He was actually really well liked, and he rivaled Jupiter as the most honored god in the Roman Empire. He was known as Mars Pater, or Father Mars. To the Babylonians, he was Nergal, and also considered to be the god of war and destruction. So he has 2 signs, Aries and Scorpio. Mars is at home in both of those signs. If in your chart Mars is harmonious, which we know is somewhat unusual. Why? Because he inherently has 1/4 discord. So this means To have Mars harmonious in your chart, he has to be really well aspected and or be in either his home sign or sign of exaltation. He brings in energy, initiative, passion, courage, defense, constructive effort. I always like to say the best trait of Mars is he builds up. Dorothy, who should be watching this program, I think is one of the few people I know with a harmonious Mars. Vicky has one, I know one.
Yeah.
Discordant Mars has expressions of impulsiveness, lust, anger, strife, destruction, aggression, accidents and injuries, and fevers. Well, let me tell you, even with a harmonious Mars, you can suffer from all of those. Jupiter. Is the religious urges of the soul. So in a chart, Jupiter is responsible for attracting abundance, opportunities, goodwill, and luck. And there's the word abundance again. So, where Jupiter falls in your chart, that area of life is subject to abundance. He has as his best trait the quality of benevolence. Any idea what that is? We see the word bene here again, so we know
Goodwill.
Bestows goodness.
Yeah.
goodwill. Yeah. Volence implies movement. So benevolence is
Towards others.
movement of good towards others. So that's what Jupiter does. He's the bearer of goodwill. His negative traits are conceit, but you know, if you were that wonderful, wouldn't you be conceited too? I also like to say that holier than thou is one of the negative traits of Jupiter.
Self-righteous, maybe?
Yeah, they can be a little. Major benefic. This means the big good guy. That's what major benefic means. So where Jupiter is, he brings 1/2 harmony with him. So to have a discordant Jupiter, which is known to happen, one has to have a very badly aspected Jupiter, or Jupiter has to fall in his, be in his fall or detriment and receive a lot of discordant aspects to be able to make something that is this good so discordant. In mythology, Jupiter was chief among the gods, and he would change his shape constantly. He was a shapeshifter in order to consort among mortals. Any idea of what he was up to? Mostly seducing them and or siring children with them. His symbols were the thunderbolt, eagle, bull, and oak. Chief ruler of Sagittarius, classical ruler of Pisces. If in your chart Jupiter is harmonious, you are somebody who will be subject to luck. Opportunities. You can have affluence and gain with little effort. This may depend on the strength of Jupiter in one's chart. I think that helps. Charitable opportunities. You know, you will never lack for an opportunity to give. Generosity, faith, and feelings of optimism. If it's discordant, then what happens is the qualities we've already discussed of conceit, arrogance, holier than thou, Religious fanaticism is one form of a discordant Jupiter. Being overly optimistic, excessively generous, and self-indulgent are all qualities of an afflicted Jupiter. There used to be a potato chip commercial. I bet you can't eat just one. Yeah, Jupiter can't. On to Saturn, the safety urges.
It's such a beautiful planet.
It is. Just enchanting.
Very elegant looking.
Here's an important word when dealing with Saturn. You gonna put the heat on, Bart? Oh, it's cold. Somebody read that for me.
Lack.
Lack. Yeah, remember that when dealing with Saturn, because Saturn brings in limitations, restrictions, losses, confinements, sorrow, responsibilities. So, what do we know about Saturn? Wherever he falls in a chart, we say that area is subject to poverty. He brings in lack or restrictions. His negative traits are selfishness. Oops, and I forgot his positive trait. System. No one can organize like Saturn can. So these safety urges have to do with the desire to plan for the future. If you think about it, in the fall, you may see ants scurrying about, picking up seeds from grasses, carrying them down into their ant hills. You'll see squirrels gathering nuts, bees storing honey. So their animal species are geared towards planning for the future, hedging against loss or hedging against lack. So that's the best quality. Saturn works best when he's planning, and this is in storing or systematizing, but not necessarily hoarding. Saturn is a major malefic, or the big bad guy in a chart, and therefore where he falls, he tends to bring in one-half discord. Oh, and here we have him in mythology, where he was known as Kronos. You can see his symbol, the sickle, which is still the symbol of the sign of Saturn. What did he use that for?
Death.
Yeah, he castrated his daddy. There you have it. He too was overthrown by his son, Jupiter. Can anyone identify what's in his arms here?
Well, at first I thought it was a baby, but
You got it. He would swallow his children because it was foretold that one of his children would overthrow him. So I think at one point, at one point his wife Rhea gave him a stone to swallow, and then she took the baby, which was Jove or Jupiter, Zeus, and took him to a cave to be nurtured by a goat. So, and it was Jupiter who later overthrew Saturn.
Kronos is also associated with time, right?
That is actually,
Is that a
it's a
different
different
Kronos?
spelling. It's C-H-R-O-N-O-S, as in chronology. But we still sort of equate the two because they've sort of become syncretized with one another. I mean, I remember as a child, whenever New Year's was celebrated, there was always the baby and then the old man with the sickle.
Oh, exactly.
So Father Time.
Is it associated at all with the Grim Reaper or no?
To some degree. To some degree, yeah, Saturn is the planet of old age, geriatrics, and ultimately death. So I think that is definitely one of his, visages. So, chief ruler of Capricorn and the classical ruler of Aquarius. Those planets, Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, represent the first octave. And these were the planets that were known in classical astrology. The reason for that is that they were visible planets. They can be seen in the heavens with the naked eye. Basically, all you have to do is go out, some night after sunset. We've had great views of Jupiter for months and months, where you can get up early in the morning and go out and look and be able to see, depending on the time of the year, any number of these planets. Now, harmonious Saturn, if Saturn's harmonious in your chart, is the sound coming through, or is it problematic?
Yes. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
Let's make sure it's on.
Oh. I asked earlier, and now it's on hold. Okay. Let's see. Planning, organization, development of systems, preparedness, safety-mindedness, foresight and prescience, personal discipline and structure, accountability, shouldering duties and responsibilities, conscientiousness. These are all positive traits of Saturn.
Christopher, why don't you turn it on?
Experiences with greed and selfishness, prolonged hardships, illness and physical disabilities, heavy responsibilities, losses, poverty, sorrows, grief, depression. So those are the negative expressions of Saturn. All right. Uranus takes us into the first of the upper octave planets.
I don't think you turned it on. You're still thinking
Is there another microphone that could be?
No, that's not a problem. Just make sure it's on so we know what's going on.
Okay,
So,
yeah. More technical difficulties. All right, in the soul, Uranus is the individualistic urges. Sudden change, eccentric behavior, fads, novelty, inventions, and discoveries are all governed by Uranus. It's said that where Uranus falls in your chart, that area of life is subject to eccentricity. Change is another word you can apply here as well. Wherever Uranus falls in your chart, that area of your life is subject to change. Now, the positive expressions of Uranus have to do with originality, original thinkers. Uranus has the ability to take information from two very different domains and then basically combine them and be able to see correlations between the two. And this is where we oftentimes get the most brilliant efforts towards inventiveness and big discoveries, either artistic, creative, or scientific, in literature and other areas. So Uranus is definitely one of the planets that can be an indicator of brilliance. But its negative trait is eccentricity. Dominant Uranus people have difficulties fitting in anywhere. They actually suffer from what I call terminal uniqueness. But Uranus is a neutral planet. Even though he can bring disruption and change, his energies are neutral. I love this image. It's from a Roman villa. It's a mosaic.
That's not a zodiac around here?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah, because in classical mythology, Uranus was one of the primordial gods, known as Father Sky. And so the concept that the ancients had of him is that he was this overarching dome of the heavens. And that it turned on an axis. So astrology, which is the study of the heavens, is ruled by Uranus, and he is the modern ruler of Aquarius. And I'm having a blank on when he was discovered. I think it was 1783, around there.
Well, you're having that blank turn your mind back.
Okay, blank's over.
17?
Yeah, it was, I think, 1782,
Yeah,
maybe? I think that's when he
you're
was
right.
discovered. So, Uranus has been considered the ruler of Aquarius, that which is new, humanitarian, cutting edge, unconventional, and of course the great reformer. Uranus brings about changes, as does the sign of Aquarius.
And that was a period of a lot of revolution, too.
Yeah, it was certainly during the Revolution, the American Revolution, and shortly thereafter the French Revolution, and
At least in the Western world.
at least in the Western world.
Right.
So, if Uranus is positive in your chart, you are going to experience inventions, insights, discoveries. Things will come to you through human agencies. You have heightened awareness. I always compare Uranus to the old cartoons that have, a light bulb going on over someone's head. Uranus is bright ideas, and it comes that way. It comes through a flash of inspiration, a flooding of consciousness. If, however, it's discordant in your chart, you will express radical or eccentric behavior. Opportunities in your life will be erratic. You may suffer from unpredictable or unwanted, undesirable changes, and you might have just a little bit of hyperactivity.
But the human agency thing, I don't get that. Does that intuitively make sense to you? Because I know it
I don't know
works
if it
that way,
intuitively
but
makes sense to me,
I
but
never
it's
figured that out.
Why would Uranus be human agency?
Aquarius, the sign of the man.
Oh,
Those
okay.
humans.
Those humans, yeah.
Those, yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
okay. No, that- Okay.
I mean, certainly revolutions are fomented by humans, as are social reforms,
Right.
but I find the way Uranus works in a chart is it's usually one person. You know, it represents someone that comes into your life almost as a catalyst that foments change in some ways. It's that spark for something different to happen, or they're that intermediary that then brings you in contact with a new group or new ideas, new ways of thinking. Another beautiful planet. Oh, I want to go back to Uranus. Uranus is so damn eccentric.
And original.
We can't quite see the rings here on Uranus. Uranus also has rings. But the interesting thing about Uranus is, as you know, all the planets turn on an axis.
Right.
And they move around the sun. Uranus,
Axis?
what's that?
It has no axis?
It has an axis. It's turned at 90 degrees.
Oh, my.
So the north pole of Uranus is always facing the sun.
Huh.
And it turns that way.
It's
Gotta be different, you know?
Yeah,
Just gotta be
exactly.
different. So,
That's fun.
I just find that so fascinating.
It is. Well, I find the fact that Jupiter being as large as it is, turns out that it is a major benefic to the planet Earth, in that it,
It absorbs asteroids.
yeah, kind of protects us a little bit.
Yeah, she is the great benefic.
Yeah.
All right, back to Neptune. Utopian urges. I don't think we even knew the word utopian until the writings of Thomas More. What are utopian urges? Is that a village in Disneyland? Oh, that was
Sort
Autopia.
of like it, yeah, we're Autopia.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, but it's sure idealistic.
Yes. So utopia is any, wonderful place where everyone gets along and life is good. The utopian urges involve imagination, visionary ideals, one's intuition, but also illusion, fantasy thinking, psychic sensitivity are all influences of the utopian urges in the soul. However, Zane warns us that wherever Neptune falls in your chart, it's subject to illusion. So, wherever Neptune's in your chart, you need to know this is somewhere you're having a pipe dream. His positive traits are idealism, but the negative traits are vagueness. And it can be easy to spot a dominant Neptune person. Just get them talking. You'll wonder,
What are they talking?
what did they say? And getting them to give some definition to something they believe in can be a real effort in articulation. But nevertheless, Neptune is a neutral planet, neither harmonious or discordant. Now, in mythology, Neptune was Poseidon, the god of horses and of the sea. With one strike of his trident, which is the contemporary sign for the planet Neptune, he could cause earthquakes, shipwrecks, and drowning. Sailors would propitiate Poseidon by drowning a horse as a sacrifice before heading out to sea. They must have had a whole lot of horses in ancient Greece, because we know they had a lot of boats. Neptune is the modern ruler of the sign Pisces. If in your chart Neptune is harmonious, you are somebody who will express idealism. You'll tend towards humanitarian goals, visionary ideas, heightened intuition, spiritual experiences, and increased sensitivity. But if Neptune's discordant, you become subject to schemes, illusions, hypersensitivity, disappointments, confusion, and vagueness. So we say that wherever Neptune falls in your chart, you're subject to illusion. But I like to say wherever Neptune falls in your chart, you're subject to disappointment.
Can it also be that if the place where it falls in your chart, you can also create illusion? I mean, like Bill Clinton had it in the 10th house, and he created a lot of illusions that people bought into. I mean, can that also be part of it?
Yeah, it's both where you can, spin a web and or be influenced.
It's also associated with charisma, isn't it?
Yes. In fact, Neptune is one of the rulers of anyone who works in performance art or drama, acting. Neptune's key because Neptune has to be prominent both in the actor, somebody who's able to pull you into their character, but also Neptune's prominent in the chart of a con man, somebody who's able to pull you in and gain your confidence and then take advantage of it. On to Pluto. We're almost to the end of class. We may actually end early tonight, unless you have lots of questions. Pluto governs in the soul what are described as the universal welfare urges. This doesn't mean getting everyone in the universe on the dole. But it is lifting up your consciousness to embrace all of the life forms outside of yourself. Pluto, however, is a dualistic and a drastic planet and tends to attract in experiences with compulsion, conformity, obsessions, and group influences. We say where Pluto falls in your chart, you're either subject to conformity or to coercion. This is an area where others want you to fit in, to maintain the status quo, toe the party line, because the group tends to like homogeneity, uniformity of some kind. There's actually a saying in Japanese, which is the nail which sticks up must be beaten down. So that's the nature of Pluto, to want to get everyone to fit in and be a part of the group. Very scary when it comes to mob consciousness. And that has really been brought home this week with all of the news segments on Egypt, where on one hand there's this amazement how populations can come together and to some degree peacefully protest to bring about, assemble and bring about changes in government. But on the other hand, when it's clear that nobody's watching, you also get, or where nobody's in control, there's an element of humanity that will come out and do the most intolerable things. So Pluto is both sides of that. It's both the mob influence and the influence of assembly to bring about change. So cooperation or coercion. Curiously, Pluto, it's not quite clear. I mean, Pluto's just so far away, it's hard to see what's going on there. So we don't know if Pluto is actually a binary planet system where Pluto and Chiron are moving around a central axis to one another, or whether Chiron is just the almost equal-sized moon of Pluto. I think it's about 1/2 the size of Pluto. So it's hard to say, but I think that idea that this is a binary planet may contribute to the qualities of that planet, which are so either or. Yeah, it's one or the other. Now, in mythology, Pluto was the ruler of the underworld, which was both Hades and the Elysian fields. Pluto had his helmet of darkness, which would render the bearer invisible. He had Cerberus, the three-headed dog, who guarded the entrance to Hades and ensured that those who entered could not get out. I think there were only 2 or 3 people who got out alive from Hades, being Mercury, who was a psychopomp that could lead souls down into the underworld, Orpheus, and Persephone. Pluto is the modern ruler of Scorpio, the sign of death. So if Pluto is harmonious in your chart, then you are subject to cooperative efforts. You are somebody who will have a strong sense of community. You'll tend to have positive experiences with groups, an awareness of your life's purpose, and a feeling of interconnectedness to other things, community just being a part of that, but this connection to all of life, sort of knowing your place in the universe. However, if Pluto is discordant, you'll tend towards having negative experiences with groups. You'll also attract in experiences with compulsion and conformity. You will fit in. You may suffer from obsessions, compulsions, and mob influences. Any questions? Any additions? Insights? Contradictions? To any of it?
Yeah, okay.
Then let's talk about homework. We'll actually end early tonight, which works well for me because I have a very painful earache. Here's your homework. It's on your sheets. Those of you online will have this as well. You'll get to match the symbol. The important thing here is you must learn astrological shorthand. You've got it. So you'll get to match these up. Also, we should have soon a exam online. And I think I'll give, if I didn't last week, I'll end up giving you the code to where you can find and take an online exam. It's really a good experience. Oops. Here's another part of your homework. 10 times. Practice. It's just like first and second grade when we had lined paper. Practice, practice, practice writing your letters. In this case, you're going to practice writing your planetary glyphs until you are tired of them. You can do it more than 10 times if you like. I'm just suggesting a minimum of 10 times. And then what you have is a circular chart, and I want you to take your computer-generated chart. Last week, the homework was to copy the signs around the outer wheel and place in the degrees and minutes of the house cusp. This week, go in and place your planets in each of the houses and include the degree and minute of the sign in which they fall.
Skip one.
I did. Can't skip that. Because I want you to work on vocabulary building. If you own a thesaurus, like Wellington probably does, pull it out and get to work. If you don't, chances are you have a thesaurus. It's like Tinkerbell coming into the room. Chances are you have a thesaurus built into your word processor, either in Microsoft Word or WordPerfect or whatever system you use. So you can go in and come up with synonyms, which are similar words to help describe these urges. We talked about them tonight being, power, domestic, intellectual, social, and so on. Find other words to add to your vocabulary so we can start building those upside-down pyramids.
I have a question.
Yes.
On the word religious,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I feel like that's a little bit misleading, even though I know it's meaningful. What's the root word of that?
It comes, the word religious means re ligare. If you think of ligare, much like the word ligament,
Mm-hmm.
it's that thing, the ligament is really what holds our muscle to the bone.
Mm-hmm.
Re ligare means to bind up, or to be bound up to God. It's the equivalent of the Sanskrit word yoga, which means to yoke. Basically, when you yoke two oxen together, you're binding them together. Yoga represents yoking up with God. So religion is those practices we use in life that help us to bind to the deific one, or to things that are greater than ourselves. Now, in recent years, there are certain fundamentalist sects that have helped to give religion a bad name.
Yeah.
So many of us now sort of get adverse experience when we hear the word religious, and even on, social networks and, online dating and stuff like that, there's like lines when you describe what you are. I've been told there's spiritual, not religious.
Uh-huh.
So, which is really rather contradictory, but it's
Yeah.
coming out of this segment and from the last 2 decades where, religion has become a dirty word for many,
Yeah.
as others try to shove it down our throats.
Right.
So, none of us want to be force-fed. Okay, and of course, homework would not be complete without reading assignments. So, Beginner's Horoscope Reader, Chapter 2. Again, these books, we do not have these books in a published in a physical format. These are electronic books, and I recommend you go online and order these and download them to your computer. You can go to www.light.org